Okay, so as I said, I'm Dr. Shannon Dadles, and just wanted to welcome you again. We're going to be using science to learn how to inspire discussion and writing in all genres. You're going to leave with a lot of tools and links to everything that I present today. And so we're just going to go ahead and get started this morning. So I'm going to share my slides. Okay. And one of the things you need to know is that this platform is a little bit different than Google Meet. And so we're very limited in some of the interaction that we could do. Everything's pretty much going to be primarily through chat. And so I'll give you some information about ways that you could do this in your classroom. But just so you know, I've made hyperlinks for Bitly's and also just using the chat function and what we have available. But this isn't exactly the way you'd see it in your classroom. So, okay, great, thank you. All right, so one of the first things we want to talk about is just the fact I've been doing this a long time. So this is about 26 years, and this is my family here. I like to say that I also teach preschool as well as all the way up to grad school, where I was an adjunct professor at Cal Baptist and CBU. I say I teach preschool because these are my triplets plus one, my 15-year-old triplets and my 13-year-old son there. And life is a field trip, and we do a lot of science things. So if you see here, we're off seeing Comet Neowise, just having fun, you know. And that's kind of one of the things that we want to really bring back, is to really inspire you to have some fun with science. And that's one of our goals today. So I want you to experience some 5E instruction. I've essentially taken about 2 months worth of instruction and shrunk it down to about an hour. So we've kind of loose fit for the 5E. We really want to increase your curiosity and think about how to use science for writing in different genres and to promote those academic discussions that are so critical for our struggling readers, our struggling learners, and our EL learners. We just want to really enjoy science as well as ELA and ELD. So I want to start with this quote here. Love this one by Carl Sagan. Every kid starts out as a natural-born scientist, and then we beat it out of them. A few trickle through the system with their wonder and enthusiasm for science intact. And that's one of the things that we really want to do. We need to capture that enthusiasm more than ever with distance learning going on, and bring it back to kids doing science and not just getting and receiving science. Because that enthusiasm can carry them into other careers. And every little thing that we can do can really work to inspire kids. So as you know, we're looking for NGSS, where we would start with a phenomena. And we're moving beyond just knowing about science, that gathering of facts, to figuring out that phenomena and that emphasis again on doing science and bringing in critical thinking and problem solving. That's very similar to what we do in Common Core. Lifted this right out of the ELD, ELA framework. You take a look at that down at that last line. Stresses critical thinking, problem solving, and analytical skills that are required for success in college, career, and life. Now you'd think that we'd be talking about logic or philosophy, but that's our ELA and ELD standards. So when we look at how we can integrate and use science and ELA and ELD, I want you to think about, some typical classroom teaching here. And if we just pause and reflect for a moment, thinking about when instructing a topic such as the solar system, what gets taught first? Science or reading ELA, ELD? If you look over to your right, you will see a little tab that says polls. If you could please click on that, I am going to open up the poll for you to choose. Which one would you teach first? Would you teach readings and literature first, get some books going? Would you teach science first? And this can give you about 45 seconds to work through that poll. I see many of us have found the poll. Got a lot of of people responding to that. Okay, some people are not able to access the poll. Okay, there we go. So looks like we've got a nice sample right here of some of our attendees. And right now, 67% of you would start with science. I have to tell you that's kind of surprising because the majority of teachers would start with readings and they would start with books. We have an interesting audience today, of course. It is StepCon, and so we tend to attract the more science-based folks. And let's talk about why you do start with science first, why it's so critical for our students to be receiving that science first. And of course, it all has to do with engagement. Right now, unfortunately, some of our kids look like this poor guy, after 5-6 hours of distance learning on his computer. We really want engagement not only during distance learning, but also just in our regular days in our classroom. So if they're looking like this, or maybe you got this going on in your house, we do, how can we really shift things so that it looks more like this? When kids are doing inquiry science, the data shows that it improves engagement. It increases attendance. It increases participation. So when we're sitting here wondering, how can we get the kids to go from those little circles that we're teaching to into actual faces and actual discussions, then we need to really have kids engaging in science first. Our children are natural born scientists. They bring previous knowledge of their experiences. They have a vast variety of backgrounds and experiences, all of which can lay that foundation for understanding science content. Engaging in science gives students a reason to talk and discuss, a desire to read and write in order to make sense of the world around them. And it really helps promote our EL learners to desire to do that reading and to do that writing and have it be on a comprehensible level. So today, we're going to be following loosely the 5E instructional model. If you wanted to know a little bit more about the 5E model, at the end when you have access to this PowerPoint of this Google slideshow, those are all hyperlinks or bit.lys in which you can go and look more deeply into the 5E model. But we're going to jump right into engaging, and then we'll move to exploring, explaining. We'll elaborate a little bit more. And the entire time I'm going to be evaluating how you're doing and adjusting my instruction as we go. Okay? So I'm going to jump into observation. But first, let's talk about what is observation, because it's not just looking. It's not just what you see. So it's not just what you already know or having kids identify what something is. You aren't going to show them a ladybug and want them to respond back, hey, that's a ladybug. Okay, that's just identification. It also is an inference. They wouldn't say, oh, the ladybug is waiting for her friend. No, it has to be very direct. I noticed the ladybug is sitting on the roots of the tree. That's an observation. Taking it to what you think it means is an inference. And differentiating between the two is a learned skill. And it starts in kindergarten or even preschool. So we're going to look at a little bit of observation with INIWORMO. That's a little term taken from UC Berkeley's Beatles project. It stands for I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. And it's also just fun to say. For today's purposes, we're probably just going to get to the I notice, I wonder part. So when we make our observation, we want our students to begin a sentence with I notice. And they can talk about what they see or hear or feel or smell. We don't recommend taste in science. That can get a little dangerous in the chemistry lab as they get older. And then they could also add to that, I wonder. So what does that make them think? What does it remind them of? Because of what reason? There's a whole lot of language going on here that normally kids might just not even try to answer in a complete sentence or have a desire to respond, but they tend to get excited. So that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to be engaging with this phenomenon. So if you could please just grab a piece of paper. Okay, we're just going to make our handy dandy science notebook, just a little piece of paper. And you're just going to jot down the I notice. So what do you notice about this creature on the screen? I'm going to give you, just a moment to jot down. And, you could ask students to do this during asynchronous learning before they come into class. What do you notice and what do you wonder? So just give you 30 seconds to jot it down. Then we're going to put it in a different place too. Okay, so we're going to move a little bit further along by starting off with what you notice and wonder. And you're probably wondering, what kind of monkey is this? And you may have noticed that it's got some long legs and some long arms and rather large nose. You may have noticed the background behind the monkey as well. We're going to watch a video clip now of these monkeys, and we're going to explore it a little bit more deeply. I'm going to have to skip the discussion portion because we can't really get too far deep in there. But I want you to type in just real quick into the chat. If you could just quickly type in one thing that you noticed about this monkey. And then we're going to go into video.
But their route is often blocked by one of the many rivers that cut through the forest.
We could just continue going on here. Crocs are mean. Why do females have smaller noses? So we've got a lot of different things that you're popping up that could really lend itself to some wonderful writing. Okay, so I'm going to come back here and return to our slides. All right. Okay, so when we take a look at what we notice and what we wonder, automatically we can see that there's starting to be a connection already between science and writing and language. So we would have this discussion probably in class, perhaps using Post-it notes like a Padlet and putting it up live. So we would be able to sort those around. And as people were looking for words that they needed, they could perhaps hear some of those terms from their teacher or from their colleagues in their class. So some people were saying, I noticed that the mother took the lead. And so they might learn that term alpha female. As they needed those words, rainforest, jungle, proboscis monkeys, these terms could be fed to them, but it's in a meaningful context. Now we're going to use some of those terms and some of those thoughts and some of those wonderings, and we're going to go a little bit deeper. Okay, we're going to return to those Padlets and using some of those ideas some more in a little while, but we're going to keep exploring more about these proboscis monkeys. Again, we're going to be taking our handy dandy science notebook, and we're just going to take that science notebook, and I'd like you to draw a model of all the foods that you saw in the video. Now, I will note my apologies for the technical difficulties. When it opened, it initially said that the monkeys had to reach the other side of the river to reach the new tender leaves. So that part, I think, may have gotten chopped out as we were dealing with the technical difficulties. I'd like you to draw a model and show me what eats what food. You're going to use pictures, labels, and arrows to show the direction the food would go. And in about 2 minutes, I'm going to ask you to hold your model up to the camera so others can see it. We don't have a camera, but I do want you to do your model. Okay, so I'll give you just about a minute, quick sketch. It's not art class today. Okay, just brief sketch. I'll give you just a quick minute or two to do that. So in the classroom, I might be walking around the class and I might be asking students about their drawings. Tell me a little bit more about your drawing. Can you explain to me what you've written here? Oh, so what does the saltwater crocodile eat? And what does the proboscis monkey eat? How can you show me what they eat? That might be my encouragement for them to use those arrows. Okay, how do I know which one's the monkey? That might be my question to encourage them to use some labels. Okay, so monkeys eat leaves. What do leaves eat? We don't want to leave out that last bit there. So then as students were to put those into Seesaw, Jamboard, into a Flipgrid, or just if you're doing synchronous learning, holding up to the camera. So that way they could see where they're at. And I might want to ask that last question about what do those leaves eat? So they can remember to get a fuller, deeper picture of not leaving out the sun providing the energy to create the food source for the leaves. Okay. So we could do that synchronously or asynchronously. And as I was walking around, I could be giving them that vocabulary at this point now. Not pre-teaching the vocabulary. Many things in science you might need to experience in order to learn these terms. They're often concepts. And simply trying to teach it as an object with a label really doesn't work for a lot of our struggling readers or our EL learners. When they see that crocodile swimming through the water, eyeing the monkey, I think they understand what a predator is. When they see the monkeys swimming for their lives, I think they understand a lot better what prey would mean. When we're talking about what they eat, then we can introduce those words carnivore, herbivore, or omnivore. And these labels now have a deeper meaning because we have had that comprehensible input that our EL learners really require. Science, again, is often about concepts. And so these concepts, they need that experiential, hands-on, or visual in order to really be able to understand where they're leading to. So we have students do this activity before content, or ABC. We've done some activities before we've gotten into some of the deeper science content we're about to go into, or some of the language arts content that we can now enter into. Now that we've had some activity, now we can start reading some articles. Now we can offer up some of that vocabulary. We can predict what the text might be about, if it's fiction or if it's informational. Because at this point, students are invested in their thoughts and their wonderings. They want to know if they're correct. They want to engage in the reading. They want to search out those answers to make sense of what is going on with things. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see one example of the readings that we might want to take a look at. Okay. And so we just might want to take a look at these proboscis monkey facts for kids. And here you might want to jot down some more information. And we can take a look at those pieces that you can add more about. We now know this is a proboscis monkey. We now know that they are very large. They live in groups, one male, several females. They produce loud sounds, snarls, honks, roars. They live in mangrove forests. So now we have an idea of what type of tree. Some people were wondering about that. It's thought to live in Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei. Grab a map. They eat leaves, fruits, insects, and seeds. Insects. So we might need to add a new word, because if they only ate leaves, fruits, and seeds, they would be an herbivore. But now that they eat insects, they would now be an omnivore. And we have more than one predator here: leopards, crocodiles, eagles, pythons, and they sleep near these rivers. I don't think I'd be sleeping around those crocodiles personally. So when we've got those monkeys facts going on, Now we have a much deeper and richer list of what the kids have probably wanted to examine and find out before we've taken them into more writing. Now that we have a beefier list and a lot more wonderings, perhaps we've found some answers to our question on our Padlet that we can now write down as information, and we're going to be able to then take it into writing. This language has been grounded in their experience, and it's giving them comprehensible input. If we simply present them just a bunch of pictures and a list of vocabulary words that they memorize or do a crossword puzzle on, before they're actually introduced to the concept, it doesn't stick with them. When we connect it to that real world, when we give them those hands-on, especially our younger students, the more concrete experiences they need in order for it to make those connections and to make those deeper, richer experiences meaningful. As I mentioned before, this is often conceptual. It's difficult to talk about food chains and food webs in complete understanding levels with simply pictures. And finally, this unfortunately doesn't capture how important the speaking and participation portion is. Speaking is critical for learning a language, but you need to have something to talk about. Simply parroting back phrases, it's okay practice, but when you really want students to learn what the vocabulary words is that they need, what is the phrasing that they want to use, and you want them to participate, you want to get them excited in doing that. And by using science, then we get them engaged. If you take a look at our science and engineering practices, by having students engage in a phenomena first, talking about it, and then bringing in additional readings, we've already done asking questions. We've already developed some models for what those food webs look like. We're going to be constructing some explanations for what's going on in science. We're wondering about the lead monkeys and the alpha females. We're wondering about the baby and the mom and the male's behavior. And we can take that into then engaging in argument from evidence and then in communicating information. So we can take that into those other texts, okay? So our informational writing, often we would have started with the reading of some books and having students gather this information. We're doing that at this point to get something much deeper and much richer. And so if we were to sort out our I notice, I wonders, we would have noticed a lot of these things were popping up. They're living in jungles up in the treetops. They sleep near the rivers. They're in the rainforest. We notice that they're eating leaves and they forage. We notice that they have to swim to find enough food. In terms of just their daily general lives, they live in groups. There's a male, many females. There's an alpha female in charge of them. We notice that the mom carry the babies. So we've got a lot more information than they would have gotten just simply going to a few websites and gathering some facts and possibly simply maybe rephrasing it into their own words. And so this activity before content will lead them to much deeper close reading, to a better understanding of those vocabulary words, okay? And then once we have that information, we can take that into much deeper critical thinking, which is exactly what we're wanting in both science, ELA, and math. That critical thinking level now, we can take it into explain in terms of argument and opinion writing. K5, this is called opinion writing. Once we hit 6th grade in English language arts, it's called argument. But in science, it's called argument throughout all the grades. And of course, you know that we don't mean the bickering back and forth. We want to take a look at this argument and decide where we are. Is it better for monkeys to live alone or in groups? And we're going to go into some claim evidence reasoning for that in just a moment. But first, I'd like you to click over on handouts. And I've loaded the alone or in groups Padlet. Pin that up there right now. And if you were to click on that, it will take you over into the Padlet for living alone or in groups. Our sentence frames for this is going to be I claim. So claim evidence reasoning, your claim is your opinion. The evidence is, how do you know that? What did you see? What data did you collect? What observations did you make? And then your reasoning is explaining how those observations or how that data support your claim. So if you could click over into that bit.ly, that would be great. I'm going to go over in there. And so we've got two different categories. We have a category of living alone or a category of living in groups. So if you could put down which one you think it's better and why. What's your evidence? Just got a couple people going on there now. I'm going to come in and share that Padlet so that you're going to be able to see it as well. Okay. And the other thing too is if you notice these are anonymous, I have not requested that you put in names or initials or anything like that. And that way your kids that might not be as apt to write or to speak in class necessarily, especially right now in distance learning with all the technology of having to unmute their mics and maybe there's other people in the room and things going on, this gives them an opportunity to really take a look and share their opinions without having to without having to get to there we go, get too social, because some folks don't necessarily want to get that social. All right, so we're getting a lot on there, and it's not thrilled with wanting me to be able to scroll today. All right, so we've got people following, we've got people doing it for survival. So we have a number of different things going on there. So that would be a wonderful discussion to have when you were back into your synchronous learning, is to open that up, put them into chat rooms. Google Meet is about to have a poll starting, and so you could start off with that poll, which one do you think? And then ask them verbally to supply that evidence. But it's always nice to have them jot down a few ideas before they go into it. And again, we follow that claim evidence reasoning. Oh, wait, same slide. Oh, my claim evidence reading slide didn't copy. Okay, well, as I said, our claim is your opinion. And then you go into your evidence, be it your data or observations, and then you explain that and how they connect. In order to guide that instruction, sometimes it's very challenging for teachers. And we oftentimes think about sentence frames for the students, but I'm going to provide you with some sentence frames for the teachers. You may have heard me say a few of these already. So I was asking people, what do you think about that? Well, what's your evidence? How do you know? So there are a couple different goals for when you use certain things. If you want individual students to simply share, you're going to do some partner talk, and you can ask them, can you tell me some more about that? Can you give me an example? Now, please notice we aren't passing any judgment on them. We aren't telling them if they're correct. We're not telling them if they're wrong. We're not getting super excited, which can be very hard, because, again, we don't want to dissuade getting as many ideas out as possible. We then have students listen carefully to each other. We can ask them to repeat things. And then we can also help those students deepen in their reasoning by, again, asking them to prove that critical thinking. And then finally, they're going to evaluate the thoughts of others. These are teacher talk moves from the Inquiry Project. And I'm just going to put that handout up at the top also in the handout section so that you'll be able to get those at another time as well. So once we've had those guided questions by the teacher, now we can provide sentence frames and sentence starters to support our learners with how do they start that discussion. We've had them have a chance to jot down ideas, had a chance to experience some phenomena and get thinking. And then we want them to respond with, well, I predict, or I think, or my opinion is, based on, or because. We want to have that additional piece there. For example, I noticed that the male waited behind until almost the whole group was across. Must be protecting people. In the video, it showed, okay, so we have many of these things that offers you opportunities to help scaffold your kids with how do they start, we notice it's not so much difficulty with having the discussion to continue. Once kids start sharing their ideas, everybody wants to share their ideas. So we simply have to remind them of how to phrase it. And this is where we can have our form and function of our ELD development be kicking in. I've also provided here an argument and opinion framework for you here. So in this one, we've got argument and opinion writing. And you'd say, what do you think? What's your claim? And then how do you prove it? We want a couple things of evidence to back up your claim. So I think it's best if they live in groups, and why would you think that? Well, my evidence is that I noticed in the video one monkey was acting as a lookout. My second piece of evidence is that if you live in a group, you don't have to outswim the crocodile. You just got to swim faster than your friend. We would then go into some reasoning for how these things prove your claim and then have a full paragraph. And again, I've provided a bit.ly there for you so that you can access that at your leisure and use that and adapt it for your classroom. All right, so now we're going to take it into a place that I think a lot of teachers don't think of very often. And it's fascinating because when we look at so many movies that are inspired by science, it's a great place to take your science experiments, investigations, observations, and that's to have students elaborate upon this in a narrative genre. We have our observations. We have our evidence. We have ideas for how they live in groups, why that's beneficial. You can return to the Padlet, look for some of that evidence on your own for doing that. And then you're going to think about how can you create a story with your observations. Any author will tell you that background research is a critical element for creating a believable story. When we look at our narrative elements for writing a story, we have setting, characters, actions, problems, and solutions. I often refer to these as the big 5 SCAPs: setting, character, action, problem, solutions. And they can take that information that we got off of those 2 Padlets, and now we can essentially sort them into some new groupings of these narrative elements for our settings and our characters. And I've given you bit.ly of StepCon 7 to be able to access this. If we were to look at some of that information that you shared, it might look something like this. Our setting is in Borneo. We're in the rainforest. We're up in the treetops. We're near the river. We've got the alpha male, Jimmy. He's got a big belly, long tail, a large, loud nose. Mom's Maria. She's got those web feet. Baby Bob, he's hanging on with those strong hands. And I like to include actions here that are based on what you observed. We saw them climb trees. We saw them eat leaves. We saw them leap. We saw them swim swiftly. Ooh, lots of alliteration too. We saw the baby cling tightly. And we've got a problem here. We need to cross the river, but there's crocodiles. So your students could tell this story, and perhaps they've identified this problem, that this is the problem of these characters. Perhaps they want to tell the story from a different perspective of a different character, of the crocodile. And the crocodile's problem is she's hungry. So you could really go a whole lot of different directions, taking this into a narrative portion, and yet using those science observations adds a depth and a richness that otherwise you might not have when we often give students that opportunity of, hey, write me a story about a monkey that has to cross a river. They might not be able to visualize everything. They might not be able to gather in that sensory details that we want in their descriptive writing. By doing the activity first and then bringing it into the content of narrative writing, you will get more depth. Let me show you what, on an adult level, what that turns into, because it's just so beautiful. This is from Where the Crawdads Sing, and she is a zoologist, which is why I picked up the book. But it was an incredible mystery I loved. The shack sat back from the palmettos, which sprawled across sand flats to a necklace of green lagoons, and in the distance, all the marsh beyond. Miles of blade grass so tough it grew in salt water, interrupted only by trees so bent they worked the shape of the wind. Oak forests bunched around the other sides of the shack. Oh my gosh, what an incredible setting description, you know? And so text tapping, I did it at an adult level, but we could do text tapping of looking at a wide variety of children's books in the content area. So these are some outstanding trade books by NSTA. bit.ly/StepCon5 will take you to this list of outstanding trade books. And these books can offer you, these are some of the latest ones from just the last 2 years. I did not include classics, you know, the Little C, many books by Seymour Simon for space, or Gail Gibbons, Up Goes the Skyscraper. You know, we have so many classic books that you could be using. But if you notice, some of these are biographies like Mario, A Computer Called Catherine. Others are about the development of an item. All in a Drop is the development of Leeuwenhoek's development of a microscope. We have books about animals, Belle's Journey. We have picture books about polar bears. We also have Otis and Will. Now, this is a narrative historical fiction piece about developing the bathysphere and diving deep into the Marianas Trench. And then we also have fictional pieces about bats in trouble, which brings into the importance of bats in our ecosystem. All of these are great for text tapping and to build into your science unit, as opposed to starting with these. We start with the science first. So where would you begin with starting with the science? Okay. Well, I think it's always fun to start with the outdoors. So we can start with doing some leaf comparisons. Especially our younger students can bring in those leaves. They can learn all kinds of different things from smooth, shiny, variegated, a variety of colors, but even our older students then can get into looking at stoma or spore or seed formations. We can take a look at the behavior of animals. I've got a whole lot of pictures of cats on frying pans, hot pots. This morning it was the bread machine. Why do cats gravitate towards these warm places like this? So, you know, some animal watching within their own home. We can do bird watching. So these are some birds that were outside during the pandemic. Took a whole series of photos. This was mating season, so I'm keeping this the PG version. This is outside Comet Neowise. You know, we took a drive out there, but Mars is out right now, the brightest it will be and the closest for the next 15 years. So these are all opportunities to take them outdoors and get them started, moon watching, stargazing. They're live animals in their home. Live webcams. This was this morning. This was the San Diego Zoo, and we've got the orangutans playing around there. Okay. We can also do a lot of different observations and experimentation with investigations. Maybe we start off with watching ice cubes melt and feeling them after a minute, after 5 minutes. And then perhaps we then take that into the literature of the snowy day and think about all the vocabulary and richness we could get from the experience and the discussions first. Always fun to make oobleck, just saying, okay? A lot of parents have cornstarch at home, and until you really know what oobleck feels like, can't really appreciate Bartholomew and the oobleck without having experienced oobleck at home. And then, of course, we could always do our Cartesian divers. If you've got all those extra ketchup packets and stuff like that we've had from 20,000 takeout meals, and, you know, kind of looking at different phenomenon about, you know, what is happening here and why. And maybe that's we bring in that bathysphere story at that point after we have a discussion about what makes this happen. Or maybe we're just looking at the condensation on our drinks and bringing in stories that have to do with rain and thunderstorms. All of these opportunities begin with science observations and are taken through step by step with the students going through the 5E lessons. Now, this is adapted from Caitlin Tucker, and this is taking a look at different resources that you could use for going through in your classroom and engaging in the 5E lessons. Now, we've done Padlet here just because of the limitations, again, with the platform, a little challenging, but oh my gosh, if you get a chance to pull up Heather McDonald's Phenomena presentation from today, she will show you excellent examples of not only Phenomena, but also how to use Jamboard. We can just use these synchronously, asynchronously, Flipgrid, Kahoot. There are so many ways to get kids to interact. And those interactions and those discussions with you feeding them that academic language and modeling that become critical, but the engagement comes from the science. And that's what that super important part is. Today, just wanted to mention that we went through these performance expectations, but there were others that, of course, we could hit upon, in addition to our text types and our ELA standards. If you notice our Venn diagram, we really were able to construct some arguments. In your classroom, you would be responding to others. We would really look at that evidence and engage in argument in evidence, which is what we're being asked to do in Common Core Math, ELA, and NGSS Science. So by hitting it through science, you're actually hitting so many other critical areas in all of our disciplines. Wanted to thank you very much for attending today, and we're wishing you best of luck and to have a wonderful time and keep learning science. I wanted to take a look again back to the chat to see if I could answer questions for you at this point in time. And I'm going through here. Thank you, Dana, for pointing out, yes, for the primary I-sentence starters, and we really do want to focus on the evidence for the older kids. And yes, we've got those outstanding trade books in there. Okay. Thank you for doing the model and then adding the vocabulary. Yes, until you need the words, the vocabulary just kind of hangs out and doesn't do anything. So thank you so very much for being patient with the technical difficulties. And I really hope that you get out there tomorrow, use some of these resources in your classroom, get them outside. Like I said, Mars is out tonight, and start thinking and just start loving and talking science. Thanks again.